Welcome to Dr. Creepin's Dungeon. Cryptid and Wendigo stories intrigue us because they blur the line between myth and reality, stirring our curiosity about what might exist in the uncharted corners of the world. These tales tap into ancient fears of the unknown lurking in the dark wilderness, combining folklore, mystery, and survival. The possibility of encountering something beyond human understanding, a creature tied to nature's raw power or humanity's darker instincts, feeds our fascination, as we shall see in tonight's 2 feature-length stories. Now, as ever before we begin, a word of caution. Tonight's tales may contain strong language, as well as descriptions of violence and horrific imagery. If that sounds like your kind of thing, then let's begin. I went on a professional cryptid hunt. Part 1. February 14th, 2003. There's a bar in New York that I don't think anyone else can see but me. Well, they don't acknowledge it, at least. It's a small place, tucked in between the Panda Express and Blarney Stone on 8th Avenue, across the street from Madison Square Garden. Sometimes I don't even notice it, to be honest. If I'm not out looking for it, it'll slip right under my radar. Sometimes I feel like I'm looking right at it and it won't be there. I've always been an observant person. It comes as a perk of being quiet and introverted. So I'd been chalking it up to that, or the simple fact that it wasn't a popular place as to why, no one had noticed it. But I started to notice something odd. Despite the fact that no one ever went in or out of it, there was always a decent crowd. For the last few days, I've been getting lunch at the cafe across the street and watching it, just to make sure that nobody went in, and sure enough, no one did. So today, I'm going to figure out what's going on. I mean, I'm not exactly the adventurous type, but I do like to have answers. It's probably nothing. Maybe the owner's just an asshole and nobody wants to acknowledge the bar. Or maybe it's an invite-only deal. Well, I just might be crazy. But whatever the reason, I'm going to find it. And I'll post whatever happens here. For some backstory, my name's Charles Kelly. I work at a marketing agency around the corner from the pub, so I walk past it every day. And I've always been very observant. I just tend to notice things around me. Well, I'm not sure when I started noticing it exactly, but I know I never saw it open. I just started noticing it. It's a very little building. It's run down with a very dark colour tone. It wasn't decorated at all. Just a sign with one golden tooth on it hanging above the door. There are only 2 windows, one on either side of the door, but they're heavily tinted. And I could see through, but it wasn't easy without drawing stairs, so I didn't do that often. Like I said, though, whenever I did, it was busy. The windows were too dark to see anything more than dark shapes moving around, though. Today I'm going to ask a few of my co-workers if they know anything about it, and it'll probably end there. I guess I'll end up posting all this anyway, but just in case anyone else out there is wondering what's up with the Gold Tooth Bar on 8th Avenue. Alright. It's a little weird. No one's heard of it. Not even Jordan, the asshole, who had a thing to say about every restaurant in town. All 26,000 of them. Not the Golden Tooth, though. We looked in the phone book for a number to call. But there was nothing, and by that time our boss just wanted us to get back to work. There was nothing, not a trace of this place anywhere. On my way home, I walked past the bar again. I don't know, something about it just weirds me out. I feel like it's right there, and I walk to the end of the block and turn around and I can't see it. Is it a trick of the light or something? I don't know. Well, there's not many avenues for me to go down, aside from walking right in, but I'll keep this updated if anything happens. February 15th. Today was a Saturday, so I didn't walk past the bar, but, I mean, it's weird, right? No one at my work had even heard of a bar that's not even a block away from it. Well, that's definitely strange, but that's not worrying. Well, I'm not much of a social butterfly. I didn't exactly have plans getting in the way, so my day was free to pursue this as much as I wanted. I wasn't really sure where to start, but I didn't want to go straight to the bar. I don't think I'm quite ready for that yet. So I decided to do some research at the library. Well, there wasn't much to my trip because, once again, there was not a trace of the bar anywhere. not the golden tooth, not the gold tooth, not even the golden teeth. I'm running out of options, aside from just walking right in. I don't know. Well, just may be what I'll do. What's the worst that could happen, right? It's an exclusive club and a big bouncer throws me out. Well, no, I suppose the worst that could happen would be that I'm crazy and I bump into a brick wall. Well, I'll do a bit more digging. This post isn't long right now, so I'll hold off until I can add a bit more to it. That'll probably be the pattern here. I'm not going to upload a paragraph at a time, so you'll see multiple days covered in one post. Well, the strangest thing just happened. I left the library and decided to go to one of the only places left that might have a chance of knowing about this place, my local bar. However, before I'd gotten 10 steps from the library, I'd picked up a tail. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm hyper-observant, so I noticed quickly. He was dressed in normal street clothes, no fancy black suit, no dark sunglasses, but I could tell he wasn't comfortable in those clothes. He was undercover. At least that's the first conclusion I jumped to. He may have just been a creep, but he was definitely following me. I took 4 lefts, and he stayed with me, but quickly dropped back after that. Well, he must have realized I knew he was following me and either abandoned ship or gotten a whole lot more careful. I decided to forego my mission at the bar and head straight home. Now that I'm home, I'm starting to think the option where I'm a crazy person investigating a brick wall might not be far from the truth. Secret agents tailing me. Come on, I'm just on the edge. Look, I'll try and take my mind off it for the weekend. And by Monday, maybe I'll have slept on it enough to be ready to go in. February 17th. Okay, I said I wouldn't think about it for the weekend, but I'm not crazy. There's this cafe across the street from my apartment, and ever since I got home last night, there's been a man sitting on one of the chairs, staring up at my apartment window. I don't know what he wants from me or how he knows which apartment I live in, but he's barely moved. He gets up once in a while, goes into the cafe, comes out with a coffee. Probably goes to the bathroom while he's in there. Well, that's what I've deduced. But he hasn't slept. He hasn't talked to anyone. He's simply been watching and waiting. It's been over 24 hours now, and he's still there. I mean, the cafe isn't even open. It's almost 2 a.m, but he's still there. When the place closed, I saw a waiter approach him, but he just waved him off and continued sitting there. It's a public bench. The police can't tell him to leave, can they? Even if they could, I sound crazy enough just listening to my own thoughts. I have no idea how crazy this would sound to the police. God, talk about crazy. I've slept a combined 3 hours this weekend. I have to work tomorrow. And if he was going to kill me, he would have done it by now. I'm going to bed. I'm at work now, but it was no mean feat getting here. I slept past my alarm this morning because, well, of course, the lack of sleep, and as I was dressing, I checked the window to see that the man was still there. He was. Realizing I had no choice but to walk past him, it was a stressful process, getting ready the rest of the way. Probably made me even more late. However, when I walked out onto the street, I stopped. The man was gone. There was nobody in any of the chairs, in fact. It was the first time I'd gone to see the guy up close, and he wasn't even there. Am I crazy? I don't know. Anyway, I saw the bar again this morning. I looked closer, and there was a lot of strange shapes moving around. It was dark, but they were moving, living things that didn't quite look human. Well, that's definitely one in the crazy column. I mean, what am I going to do at this point? Right. I'm going in after work. I'm going to do it. This is it. I'm either crazy or I'm not. All right, I didn't go in. I'm back at my home now, but things have gotten so much worse. As soon as I got out of work, I noticed a man following me. I'm not sure if it's the same man from the cafe, but I have a feeling it was. Then I noticed another guy across the street on the bench. He was looking at me over a newspaper. There was a woman drinking a cup of coffee, but was there really coffee in there? I had a really strange sensation on my wrist, and I looked down at my watch. I took it off, and it looked normal. I knew that dark patch was always there, but what if it wasn't? What if it was a bug? I ripped it off and stuffed it in the nearest trash can, just in case. A woman with earpods glanced up at me in confusion from the other side of the bin. She could have been one of them too. I backed away from her, then broke into a run towards my home. I didn't even glance at the gold tooth. I just needed to get home. And that's where I am now. I locked the door, closed the blinds, and then checked my room for anything that could have been changed. Everything was exactly where I'd left it, though. Okay, now that I've just typed all that out, I think this whole ordeal is driving me crazy. I think. And that's the worst part, because as crazy as this all sounds, there's a little part of me that's saying I'm right. Maybe all the others were an overreaction, but I don't know. There's just something about the cafe guy. I'm going to call in sick to work tomorrow. I've decided that much. I don't know what I'm going to do, but what I do know is that eventually my curiosity will get the better of my paranoia. It always does. This time, though, I don't know what the results could be. February 18th. Someone knocked on my door this morning, moments after I would have left my apartment for work. It was a short affair, 3 sharp knocks, then a beat, and then they left. No attempt to jiggle the doorknob, no follow-up knock. I was looking out the window at the time, making sure no one was watching me, and I jumped at the sudden noise, knocking over a potted plant I kept on the windowsill. I held my breath for a few moments, but there were no more noises. Then I scrambled over to the door and looked through the peephole, and there was no one to be seen. I immediately thought I must have imagined the knocks. It certainly wouldn't be the biggest hallucination I'd experienced, at least I hope so. You know what, let's just say all this is real. What is the gold tooth? Some kind of secret government organization? I suppose I have no proof that it is a bar, but it just looks like one. It could be a test facility. It could be some kind of surveillance outpost. And now that I've been poking around it, I've been put on, some watch lists, and I could be in danger. What if they arrange an accident for me? Since then I've been blocking my windows and staying in the middle of my apartment. This has all happened in the course of, 4 days? I've never had anything like this. I'm not a paranoid guy, so I'm starting to think it may be real after all. I waited, alone in my apartment for almost an hour, pacing nervously, before I realized I should probably do something. Call it suicidal, call it a rash, impulsive decision, but I figured if I was going to go down, I might as well figure out what was in this place. After peeking out of the window to see that the cafe man was nowhere to be found, I pulled on a Yankees cap and some sunglasses and slipped out of my apartment. When I got to the base of the building, I took the corner onto 8th Avenue and bumped into a man coming round the corner. I moved to brush past him, but then I recognized him. It was the man that had been following me for the past 3 days. He didn't seem to be caught off guard. Instead, he seemed to wait for my move for the split second it took for me to decide it. I lowered my shoulder and rammed into him, knocking him to the ground, and broke out into a sprint towards the gold tooth. As onlookers moved to help the man up, I continued on. When I was halfway there, I glanced over my shoulder to see that he hadn't begun to chase me. The crowd had dispersed, and he was just watching me, staring me down. I didn't wait another moment, knowing that he could have accomplices waiting for me around any corner. I made it safely to the sidewalk in front of the bar, though, and when I looked back momentarily, the man was gone. I took a deep breath and barged through the door. The bar went quiet. It was, in fact, a bar, as I'd originally guessed, but not a normal bar. There were several tables scattered about, a few booths, and the bar, and in those seats sat the strangest arrangement of beings I'd ever seen. There were some humans, but other than a bartender and a group in a corner booth, they were all wearing black suits and darkened sunglasses, quite the formal attire for such a relaxed environment. Well, they were the normal ones, though. There was a wide variety of unearthly creatures sitting and seemingly eating, creatures that stories were whispered around the campfire about, creatures that were responsible for the bumps in the night. At the bar there were several tall, wiry creatures with skin so dark I'm not sure black would even describe it. They seemed to take in all the light from around them, making it difficult to see where their forms ended and the background began. Their eyes remained the only blemish, the pure white specks in the dark void of their heads. To their right was a scarecrow, like the one you'd see in a cornfield, except as I watched it, it slowly blinked its eyes and then gave me a smile. Next to the scarecrow, there was what looked like a normal man, well, normal except for the red eyes. But I could tell there was something off about him. He wasn't human. He was sitting with several smaller creatures that looked straight out of a biblical painting. They couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall, with little spiked tails waving around and wings jutting from their shoulders. They had grey-green skin and spiked teeth, and they smiled wickedly at me. There were all those and so many more that I saw, but I was brought out of a shocked moan of panic by a voice. "You're not supposed to be here." And then there was the click of a pistol, and I felt cold metal against my temple. Part 2. February 18th. I slowly raised my hands and gulped as the gun pressed into my temple, every eye in the room on me. You could have heard a pin drop. Then the man holding the gun spoke again. "Nobody's used that entrance as long as I've been here. Who are you with?" he asked. Well, I wasn't sure how to reply, but before I could say anything, a door in the back opened, and to my utter surprise, the man from the cafe walked through wearing a sharp black suit identical to the ones the other humans in the bar were wearing. He was buttoning his sleeve as he walked in, and he seemed not to notice the tension in the room at first. Then he glanced around, saw my predicament, and chuckled. "Well, everyone, sorry for my timing. I had to do a quick wardrobe change. Don't worry about Mr. Kelly there. I've been tailing him since he discovered us. If he were going to tell the world about us, he'd already have done it." "Put the gun down, you twat," a British voice said from somewhere behind the man holding me at gunpoint. "You're clearly scaring the man." "Why'd he come through the front door then?" he responded, gesturing with the gun towards the door, which caused a brief scare. "Nobody comes through the front door." "Well, let's see what Agent Osborne has to say, why don't we?" the British man suggested, and he turned back to face the man who'd been tailing me. He put on a pair of sunglasses, matching the outfits of everyone else in the suit, and cleared his throat. "This is Mr. Charles Kelly," Osborne introduced me, much to my surprise. He caught wind of our location, seemingly by accident, a few months back, and ever since then he's been doing his best detective work trying to figure out what our deal is. When I led him on to me, I figured he'd either get scared and give up, or risk it all and barge in. "That's a risk you were willing to take?" a woman asked from the same area as the British man, and I realized I no longer had a gun to my head. I relaxed a bit and looked at the group going back and forth with Osborne. There were 5 of them, 3 men and 2 women. 2 of the men were standing. One of them had just holstered his gun, and a second, who stood in the back, a thin gangly man with a dark look on his face. "Don't worry, I talked with Danny beforehand," Osborne said, nodding to the bartender who handed him a drink. "Well, the idea was, if he's willing to come in, he's the kind of person we're looking for." "You want to hire him?" the woman replied. "Off the street? Are you crazy?" "Diva, if I weren't crazy, would I be here?" Osborne returned. "Well, that's beside the point. The point is, he's in. He knows now, and if we turn him out with no answers, he's either going to keep coming back or tell everyone. We don't want to have to kill him." "You're going to kill me?" I exclaimed, and then realized my mistake. No, I'm sorry. Carry on." "Well, thank you." Osborne nodded curtly. "Well, I'm not terribly opposed to the idea," the British man said with a shrug, and his group looked at him in shock. "Look, we've got that job over in South Dakota. I don't see the harm in taking him along, if only to preserve the prosperity of this establishment." "South Dakota?" I exclaimed. "I can't go to South Dakota." "Well, we could always take you out back and put a bullet in you," Osborne mused. "You're in this now, whether you like it or not." I sputtered for a moment and glanced around, but there was no help to be found in the eyes of the others. And that's when I realized something. I'd gone too far, just as I'd feared, but it didn't mean I was going to get killed, captured, or tortured. It meant that I would survive as long as I could, that I was truly in. All eyes were on me, human and otherwise. I gulped. They had guns, their threats were well founded, and I had no choice. I held up my hands and said, "Fine, you win." Osborne smiled. "Excellent. I do hate killing when it's not necessary." He turned to the rest of the patrons and said, "Back to your drinks, everyone." The low hum of conversation returned, and Osborne approached me, putting his arm around my shoulder. "Well, now that you're part of the team, what do you say we sit down and get to know each other?" "Sure," I replied, nodding. I was beginning to warm up to this idea, especially when it was compared to a bullet in the brain, and I figured I might as well get to know the closest thing I had to a connection here. He gestured to sit in one of the booth seats and sat opposite me. I glanced around, taking a good look at the interior for the first time. Well, it was very nostalgic, with a rustic feel to it. Oak was predominantly featured as a material, and it was lit by candlelight from several chandeliers and a few wall-mounted candles. The bar was at the opposite end from where I'd come in, and there seemed to be an area cleared out in front of the bar, no tables or anything. To my left of the bar, there was a normal-looking door with no window, so I couldn't tell what was on the other side, but to the right, there was a door marked Kitchen. Above the bar, in the center of the room, was a sign similar to the one outside, with the image of the golden tooth, except this one read, "Established 1959. All in all, it was a very atmospheric place, large enough to fit a decent-sized crowd, but small enough for it to feel cozy and, if not for the appearance of dozens of strange creatures, it would have passed for one hell of a normal bar. "So, do they have anything to drink here?" I began the conversation tentatively. "I mean, normal stuff, or is it just—" I gestured at the creatures at the other tables. "Unnatural drinks." "Well, you keep talking like that, you're going to get yourself in quite a bit of trouble," he warned. "But yes, they do serve drinks you'd find at outside restaurants." "So, what is this place?" I asked abruptly as he called over a waiter. "Why can't anyone else see it? What are all these creatures? Are you with the government or something?" "Well, I'll go over it briefly now, but I am a busy man. I just spent the last 3 days following you," he pointed out. "I'll have time to explain everything if you survive the South Dakota job." "Is there, a reason to believe I won't survive the job?" I hurriedly asked as the waiter arrived. "What is the job, anyway?" "Come on, let's order," he replied. "I haven't had a meal that wasn't from that dreadful cafe across the street from your place in 2 days. I'm dying for a well-cooked meal." "Hey, I like that place," I muttered, but he'd already turned to address the waiter. "Yeah, I'll have the bon bo hui and a Coke, please," he said, and I raised my eyebrows. "What's that? Some sort of supernatural delicacy?" I asked, intrigued. "Well, actually, it's a Vietnamese beef noodle soup," Osborne said pointedly. "The chef's got a knack for it. Oof, it's delicious." I chuckled, slightly embarrassed, and ordered the same. Then I turned back to Osborne. "All right, explain all this to me. Who are you?" "I'm Agent Russell Osborne. I work for the Supernatural Protection Agency, where I've worked for going on 11 years, he said. "It's fairly self-explanatory, as far as agencies go, so I'd say it's my turn for a question. You're taking this incredibly, almost suspiciously well. What's the deal with that?" "Am I suspicious?" I quickly asked, eyes widening. "I didn't mean to do that. I promise I'm not going to tell anyone. It's just like you said, I'd rather be in than dead. I'm not—" All right. It's just a question. You're not on trial," Osborne replied, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "Well, I was just curious, because you don't strike me as a very brave person. But with that reasoning, I suppose it makes sense." "I'm not a very brave person," I said indignantly. "I'm no Bond, but wouldn't say I'm not very brave. Ah, but I would, he told me matter-of-factly. Alrighty then. What else do you want to know? My bruised ego, forgotten in the face of forbidden knowledge, I pondered what to ask carefully. Why are all these things here? And why doesn't the public know about them? Well, I'll answer those in reverse, he began. These are supernatural creatures. Their origin is unknown to us, or known but unexplainable. Some pose a danger to the public, some don't. The public cannot know about either because of their nature. Let's use the aliens in the room as an example. If the public knew of confirmed extraterrestrial life, they'd be pressuring the government for funding for space programs, for establishing interstellar communication, for pushing out into the universe. Well, as you might guess, there are many problems with that. Well, politically speaking, there'd be mountains of red tape to cut through, jurisdictions and policies to avoid. It'd be a nightmare. It's much simpler to do it this way. The other, more important problem is that we don't know everything. There are creatures more powerful than any of us combined. There are creatures we don't even know about, and if the public knew of the existence of some of them, they'd seek out the others. We have no idea what could happen, so for now, it cannot be made public. That's why they're here, in this bar. They're non-hostile. As you can imagine, it's fairly difficult to establish a social life when you're, say, an 8-foot pile of gelatinous fluid, or when you're literally the devil himself. So this is a place both for creatures to relax and enjoy themselves, and for those who know of their existence to speak freely. I paused for a moment, then let out a long, slow exhale. Wow. Don't really know what to say. It's quite a bit to take in. It is, so let's not dwell on it. You have plenty of time to do that the next time you hear an odd sound in your apartment, so let's get to know each other, he suggested as the food arrived, and the conversation turned much more light-hearted after that. We talked for just under a half hour as we ate, but, as he'd mentioned, he did have some pressing matters. He also told me that the entrance I came through was never used. It was just there to throw off anyone who somehow saw the bar's exterior, and that the next time I came I should come in through a back exit of a store around the block. I was going to follow him out, but the British man called me over to their booth. "Wait a minute, lad. Come speak with us," he said, waving me towards them. "We're going in on this together. We owe you at least a briefing." "Yeah, I'd appreciate that," I nodded, sliding into the booth. "Well, we're heading out on Friday. We can arrange travel for you, and we'll arrive on location early Saturday morning. We'll have someone send the details to your apartment. From the airport in South Dakota, we'll make about an hour-long drive to the site. We'll spend as long as it takes to get the job done. I shouldn't be more than a day or two. Then we'll have you back by sometime Monday morning. Might have to tell your boss you'll be a bit late, but that's provided you survive, of course." "That's exactly what Osborne said. What do you mean, if I survive?" I asked. "Is it very likely that I won't?" "Very likely," he repeated with a chuckle, then looked to the group, who also laughed. "Well, the last rookie I saw go toe-to-toe with a Wendigo, his funeral's next Wednesday, and we're marching into a den of them." "A Wendigo? A den of them? He died?" I sputtered in surprise. "What do you mean, like the Native American myths?" "Myths," the man who told me previously at gunpoint chuckled. "They're about as mythical as Charles Manson. Yeah, sure, you've heard the stories, but just because they're stories doesn't make them any less true." "It doesn't make any sense, you muppet." The British man shook his head. "To be honest, you might just have delayed the inevitable. You're not choosing life. You're just bettering your odds ever so slightly. But hey, have a seat. I'll introduce you to everyone." I did, and after the names were given, we started chatting, and I found out more about the group. The British man was named Edward Richards, the leader and founder of the group. The woman on the back left seat was named Frida Absbruksdottir. I believe I butchered that name. The tall, scary man standing behind them was Lawrence Cases, and the woman sitting across from me was Tiva Stewart, and the man who didn't seem to like me very much was Zephan Talbot. They were a group called the Outsiders, and they were sort of mercenaries in the supernatural world, taking some of the more dangerous jobs for, well, generally a lot of money. We talked for quite a while. I tried to steer the conversation towards the supernatural, but they weren't too keen on talking about it. Zephan definitely did not like me, though. I'm not sure why, but he's definitely got a bone to pick with me. After the conversation died down, I left through the back entrance Agent Osborne had pointed out to me, and I went back home. It was very strange going from a world of mystical, otherworldly creatures to one where the biggest worry was filing out your paperwork on time. I didn't have much time to appreciate it, though, as I was only 3 days away from an event that might potentially end my life. Well, I have a lot to think about, and a lot of sleep to catch up on, so I'm going to rest for a while. February 20th. Well, the days have flown by since my visit to the Gold Tooth, as much as I wish they'd slow down. Work has been a welcome distraction, but these hours at home alone, I haven't dared go back to the bar. I don't know why, but it feels like I just turned in my one get into the bar free card, and if I want to go in again, I'd have to survive South Dakota. Well, not much is happening, but I'm guessing I'm going to receive the details about the job sometime later today, since we're leaving tomorrow. Sure enough, about 5 minutes ago there was a knock at the door, and when I opened it, a manila folder with some papers, clippings, and photographs was there, unattended on the floor. It seemed like it was a habit for these people to do that, disappear after knocking, but I picked up the folder, and I'm currently going through it to see what I can get from it. The first 5 things are all about wild animal attacks that happened in a forest in South Dakota on the banks of the White River. Most of the newspapers claim that the actual pictures of the victims couldn't be shown, as they were too graphic for publication. But photographs were attached to the clippings, and they were graphic, all right. They were shredded to bits, all in different manners and methods, but I can tell it was done by the same thing. Well, I won't go into detail, but yep, it was messed up. The papers all claimed that it was by wild animals, which is obviously just a cover-up. When I got past the articles, there was an important-looking document. At the top, it said in big block letters, "The White River Wendigo." Apparently when they were first researching it, they believed it to just be one Wendigo, but someone sent in a team and they were quickly overwhelmed by 2 fully grown ones. That's when the Outsiders, the name of the group I was temporarily joining, was called in. They had a rough location of where the den was, which was a densely forested area along the banks of the White River, but not much beyond that. Also enclosed was my plane ticket, which was from a company I'd never heard of before, instructions for the trip, and a packing list. There were some more papers behind it, but I decided they'd probably just be reiterating what I'd already read, so I decided to focus on packing. It was mostly the things you'd normally take on a weekend camping trip: clothes, tent, flashlight, all the survival gear. The note had also said that weapons and other exotic supplies would be provided by the Outsiders, but I've already been told twice it's pretty likely I'm going to die this weekend, so I don't want to take any chances. However, I don't have anything that could remotely be considered a weapon at hand, so tonight I'm going to run down and buy a few things at the local sporting goods store. Probably a multi-tool and a larger knife, if you can even get one. I'm not much of an outdoorsy guy. I have some camping supplies from my dad, but I've never tried to buy anything, so I don't know what sort of regulations there are. Well, I think that's it, though. There's not much else I can do other than wait. Part 3. February 21st. Work felt like it went by in the blink of an eye today. I've had a mixture of apprehension and excitement towards this new experience, despite the warnings I'd received. I'd never do anything fun or exciting, and even though it was like going from a Nerf battle to Afghanistan, I couldn't help but feel alive. Ironic, I know. I walked home after work, adrenaline beginning to course through my body. When I got to my apartment, I couldn't sit still. I'd packed all my bags last night, so I went through everything and checked once more that it was all where it was supposed to be. It all was. I'm just watching now, since the instructions said to arrive at the airport at 8. I'm a little restless, and I know I probably should be at least a little scared. I'm guessing that'll kick in soon enough. This is just the most exciting thing I've ever done. In, well, my life, probably. I don't think I've even left the state before, and now I'm going halfway across the country with people that would kill me for saying the wrong thing. Well, okay, yeah, it's pretty scary. Man, I need to get out of my head. I'm gonna go for a walk. I managed to pass the time, and at 7:30, I took my bags downstairs and called a cab. I gave him the directions, and now I'm waiting. I think I've settled on a sort of mellow excitement, because this is definitely a scary experience, but at the same time it's novel and intriguing. I wonder what the airport will be like. I don't recall there being anything like that in the area. Or maybe it's hidden like the bar. Oh, this is absolutely crazy. The directions led to this private little airstrip where, at first glance, the only barricade between us and it was a little booth with a bar blocking the road. However, when we pulled up to it, the interior was incredibly high-tech. There was a wall of monitors all showing feeds from cameras set up across the compound, and there was an array of weapons on the back wall. I explained why I was here, and he said the cab driver couldn't go any further. He pointed me towards the hangar at the beginning of the runway. I could just barely see a few shapes milling around. As I got closer, revealed to be a group. They were busy preparing the plane, which was quite the shock to me. I was expecting some sort of passenger plane, maybe even a private jet, but this was small. I doubt it could hold more than 10 people, so we were all comfortable, but barely so, especially with the gear strewn about the cabin. Tiva's flying, so her and Zephan are in the cockpit, but the rest of us are just sitting in the cabin. It's been about 20 minutes, and Edward's telling us we should get some sleep, so I'll do that for the rest of the flights. Well, there's not much else to do. I mean, I brought a magazine, but no one else is doing anything, so I don't want to seem like the odd man out. I'll update again when I get the chance. February 22nd. Edward woke us up very early this morning and told us we were about 20 minutes out from the job site. Then he walked over to the back of the plane, pulled down a hanging screen, and a map of Cody Township, South Dakota, appeared. "Oh, this is our location," he began, his accent seemingly accentuated by the nature of his speech. "Oh, as I'm sure you've all, well, except perhaps Zephan, read in the briefing, the reports have mostly come from this forest on the banks of the White River." At that, he pointed to an area about a mile in size, consisting of a dense forest, tucked into a bend in the long, winding river. "We've obtained access to a cabin within the forest. That's where we'll be staying for the duration of the job." "Wait a minute," I interjected. "We're staying in the forest where the monsters are? It doesn't seem very safe, does it?" "But generally speaking, these talks go on without interruption, and I'd like to keep it that way," Edward said, and I thought better of continuing the discourse. "Now, as some of you may know, Wendigos rely heavily on changes in scenery for tracking. They're very perceptive of things like slight imprints in the ground where someone's walked, residue of breath in the air, or especially human waste, which is why it's imperative that you only use one of the bathrooms within the cabin, unless otherwise directed by me and me alone. The first day will be purely reconnaissance. We'll be establishing cameras here, here, and here, and sensors every 50 meters in an 85-meter perimeter around the cabin. We'll then wire every feed into the surveillance room, which has been prepared in the basement of the cabin, and then we'll wait. Unless they're abnormally hungry, Wendigos tend to hunt at night, so sundown tonight will be when we make our first move, if they don't do so. Upon landing, each of you will receive a map of the forest with markings designating the camera and sensor locations, along with the cabin and where we believe the den to be. We cannot plan for it what will happen tomorrow, as it depends entirely upon what happens today. Any questions?" And at that he looked directly at me, and I shook my head. "Excellent. Well, we should be landing shortly." After Edward had briefed us, the group began to talk quietly among themselves, and Edward came over to sit next to me. In a low voice he said, "I know you're well aware of this by now. There's a very good chance you won't come out of this place in one piece, and we can't afford to coddle you like a rookie normally would be. The best we can do is try and make sure you're never alone, but even that won't take precedence over getting the job done. Thanks, I guess, I replied, not really sure how to respond. Well, I suppose if I go down out here, I'll at least be more excited than if Agent Osborne had taken me out beside the shed and put a bullet in me. He raised an eyebrow at that, but didn't say anything. In other words, yes, I've made peace with my maker. I'm pretty sure I'm headed when the lights go out, I said. Then he told me probably the most disconcerting thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Oh, you have no idea where you're going. Trust me, I've been there. Then he stood and walked up to the cockpit without another word. Well, I've been trying to figure out what he meant by that ever since, and to be honest, I don't have a clue. It was only about 15 minutes before we landed, and it was an airstrip similar to the one we'd flown out of. After we landed, a long-stretched limousine pulled up in front of us, and a woman stepped out. She wore sunglasses despite the early hour, and she introduced herself as our employer. She said that, while it was unusual for employers to introduce themselves personally to the employees in this business, this was an unusual scenario. I'm not sure if she was talking about me or something I don't know about yet, but this past hour has been a whirlwind, on top of the hurricane the past week has been, and I'm barely staying afloat. After she exchanged some words with Edward, he turned back to us and said we'd be leaving momentarily. I figured we'd take the limo, but after she introduced herself, she led us to an old beat-up sedan, and Edward told us that was our vehicle. Now, everyone else is talking about the job. I even heard a few bets going around on who'd get the first kill, and there was even an over-under on how many of us would make it out. But I had that same uneasy feeling I'd had earlier. I sat in the back quietly, which seemed to throw off the big European guy. I forgot his name. He looked at me funny for a while. Then he began looking around, simply observing things. He's pretty scary, to be honest. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's reading this over my shoulder as I'm writing, too. We're at the edge of the woods right now. It's around 9 in the morning, and Edward's going through all our stuff one last time to make sure we brought everything. He says once we go in, we're not coming back out until the job's done, so we'd better have everything we need. I know I do, and I'm pretty sure these guys do as well, so there shouldn't be any problems. Well, the difference between the forest and the outside is like night and day. The trees are packed together incredibly tightly, even encroaching on the small dirt road at times, and they block out almost all sun, except for when it filters through the leaves, spraying tiny rays of light down upon us on occasion. It wasn't a gradual shift either. It was like when we entered the forest, someone had turned a switch. The mood once again changed as well. We were quiet now, on edge. Every blade of grass, every leaf, every branch seemed like it was being taken in by these outsiders. The big guy next to me keeps looking over at me, though. He's freaking me out. It was only a 10-minute drive from the edge of the forest to our cabin, but it felt like a lot longer. Something about this place seems off. It doesn't feel like a normal forest. Well, something I can't put my finger on is that there's no sound. No birds chirping, no sticks are breaking under the feet of animals. It's just the occasional sound of leaves rustling with the breeze, and the methodical sounds of the group unpacking inside. I should probably go get my stuff ready, and I just wanted to get acclimated to the forest. It's around noon now, so we'll probably have some food and then go out to start setting up the sensors for tonight. It's about 4 now, and we're working on setting up the surveillance. I got paired off with Tiva Stewart, the one that flew the plane, and she's, well, more normal than everyone else, I suppose. It was after lunch when Edward told us the assignments, and when we were paired, she came over to me. "Looks like I got the rookie," she said, slightly raising her eyebrow. I was initially nervous that she was annoyed or even resentful that she'd been... I was initially nervous that she was annoyed or even resentful that she'd obtained the added burden of someone with no experience. But then she laughed and the tension quickly dissipated. "Don't worry. As long as everything goes according to plan and you follow instructions, it'll all be fine." "I can deal with following instructions," I replied. "But what happens if something doesn't go according to plan?" She sighed for a moment. "You're getting down to it, aren't you? If something goes wrong, we improvise. Which is why if that happens, you'll be in a spot of trouble because you have nothing with which to base your improvisation off of. Well, let's hope everything goes to plan then, I said, a dark mood setting in once more. Quickly she nodded her head in the direction we'd been assigned. Come on, we'd better get going. I followed along and we struck up a conversation. It was a pleasing reprieve from the oddness of the rest of the trip. While we spoke, it almost seemed like it was just a walk in the forest, and that, combined with the density of the trees proving a challenge to navigate, provided ample distraction from the horrors that lay within it. But then we arrived at our first location. When we got there, she removed her pack and set it on the ground. It was like a crash landing to reality when she extracted the sensor and began inputting some predetermined information into the keypad. As she was affixing it to a tree, suddenly a loud, sharp screech sounded from somewhere behind us, causing me to jump. Was that one of them? I asked, suddenly on high alert. Yeah, sure sounded like it, she replied. I mean, a lot of cryptids have that call, but it makes the most sense that it was a Wendigo, considering we're here to hunt them. Well, I thought they were only awake at night. What are they doing up now? I asked. No, they only hunt at night, she corrected. They tend not to sleep a lot. Well, it just keeps getting worse. I looked around, taking in our location, and especially making note of where the sound had come from. I judged it to be around a few 100 feet in the direction the sensor was facing, so I assumed it to be the den, or at least a commonly traversed spot by these creatures. You ready to go? Tiva asked as she hoisted the pack once more. That's it. This is a quick task. Yeah, I mumbled, not paying her much attention. I was in survival mode. It was as if the call had awakened something primal in me, something left over from when we were bashing rocks together to make weapons. Well, I've taken the time while Tiva's setting up the second sensor to write this, and I'm beginning to feel strange. The primal fear has heightened my senses and flooded me with a sense of invincibility, almost to the point where I anticipate the moment the creatures make their attack. It's an enjoyable feeling, if I were to be honest, and one that's entirely new to me. I notice everything. My reflexes are at their peak. The anticipation will likely fade by tonight, but I believe that I am ready. As we walked from the fourth to the final sensor, we came across a well-trodden path. The road we came in on was the only path marked on the map, so I'm not sure where this one came from, but I have an idea. There were hoof prints packing down the dirt, along with another set of prints I didn't recognize, so it could be a hunting path used by the creatures. The hoof prints could be something they hunt, and I assume the creatures themselves have made the ones I don't recognize. We're almost done now. Tiva's just finishing setting up the last sensor, and we're going to begin the walk home soon. The sun's beginning to set as well, so it's near perfect timing. When we were just about at the cabin, there was another screech. It sounded like it was from the same area as the last one, but it sounded different. Not the screech itself, it was certainly from the same creature, but the way it was delivered. It seemed angry, provoked even. Tiva and I met up back with the rest of the group in front of the cabin, and in some sort of odd finale to the wide array of emotions I'd seen throughout this trip, everyone had their own. Edward was anticipating the hunt. Tiva was in a contemplative mood, presumably thinking of the possible outcomes. Frida was checking all her weapons yet again. Lorenz, yes, I've finally learned the large European's name, was standing silently, glaring at everything he looked at. And Zephan seemed to not know a mission was about to happen, as he threw small stones in the general direction of an upstairs window until Edward told him to stop. I'm still pretty sure he doesn't like me, and I'm still not sure why. I'll have to give it more thought later, though, as it's getting quite dark out now, and Edward's just told me to go inside. All right, it's 8 o'clock now. It looks like it's going to be quite the boring night. The others have been going out on patrol sporadically, but I haven't run into any creatures. Well, since Edward claims that he can't afford to have me wasting his time, he put me in charge of watching the sensors and monitors, and there's been absolutely nothing. It's been about 2 hours of this now, and boredom honestly poses the greatest danger to me as is. 9 o'clock, still nothing. 10 o'clock has come and gone, and we have yet to encounter anything mildly spooky. Well, it's 10:22 now. Lawrence just radioed in that he spotted one of them in his scope. Minutes later, I had 3 readings on the sensors. I told Edward about it, and he quickly went to rouse Zephan and Tiva, who had been sleeping during Lawrence and Frida's shift. On their way out, he told me they'd take care of the creatures, then they'd be right back, and to watch them on the monitors if I got worried. Well, I'm not terribly worried about them. They probably know what they're doing, but... 3 readings on the sensors. Lawrence wasn't patrolling within the range of the sensors. There were 4 creatures out there, and we'd only accounted for 3. Now, these aren't just heat sensors or something that could be tripped by anything with a beating heart. Edward explained that they were established to track some sort of energy native to these creatures. If there's 3 blips on the radar, it's safe to assume that there's 3 things with the capability of doing some very bad things out there. To be honest, 1 more than expected probably isn't the worst thing in the world. But if there's 4, then why not 5? Why not 15? Why not an army? Oh, they could be walking straight into a death trap. I have to do something. Part 4. February 22nd. In hindsight, the group having left me without a radio may not have been the greatest bit of planning we've seen so far. Now the only way for me to warn them is if I were to go out there into the pitch black, demon-filled forest and tell them myself. And that just might be what I'll do. Well, in a few minutes. That fear I keep saying is eventually going to set in? Yep, it's here. What am I doing out here? I'm in South Dakota. I have work on Monday. This time last week I was under the impression I was being wiretapped. So maybe that's not the best example. But still, death. Those screeches I heard during the day are happening what feels like every 5 minutes now. And to make matters worse, the 1 camera we have that's showing right outside the cabin just went out. And I'm pretty sure that right before it did, I saw something blue and hazy approaching the lens. And that's when I realized something. I was alone. There was no one that was coming to help me. In fact, if I died here, no one may ever find my body. I don't know why that came to mind, but it's a thought that echoed through my mind as I paced back and forth in the surveillance room. I was beginning to form a plan, though. There was something outside, I didn't know what, and there were things deeper in the forest that I believed I knew something about. The Wendigos could be killed with regular weapons, but if there were other creatures out there, there's no telling how I could deal with them. The only way I could find out was by warning the others, and the time for that may be running out. I made up my mind. I was going out there. I would either reach the others or die trying. They'd left me a pistol, and I walked over to the table where I'd left it and picked it up. I'd never fired a gun before, not even in preparation for the mission. But if I would ever do it, this was as good a time as any to get started. I quickly ran to the back wall, where the leftover supplies were. I strapped a holster around my waist and jammed the pistol in. Then I quietly climbed up the stairs and entered the dark main floor of the cabin. As I slipped out of the basement door, sliding it closed behind me, I tried in vain to slow my heart rate, but my breath only quickened as I crept through the darkened room to the front door. I had my hand on the knob and was about to turn it, when the temperature of the metal began to drop. I quickly let go, fearing my warm hands would stick to it, and then paused. I slowly knelt down and peered through the keyhole to see. "What the hell?" I murmured, looking closer. It was the same hazy blue mist that I glimpsed before the camera went out, and it was hovering outside of the door. It was the same hazy blue mist that I glimpsed before the camera had gone out, and it was hovering outside of the door. It was about 4 feet of it, hovering a foot above the ground, and glowing a dull blue light with an odd calmness. There was a moment when nothing happened. It stayed still, simply existing. Maybe, I thought to myself, there's nothing to fear. Maybe it's a friendly creature here to help me. I stood clearing my throat to attempt to make contact with it, but then, in a great rush of blue light, the mist poured through the keyhole, making a beeline for my chest. I was standing too close to the door. I had no time to react, and it rushed out of the keyhole and into my body. As soon as the first tendrils of fog touched my chest, an icy chill spread through my body. I panicked, all thought for stealth gone, and I frantically backed up into a wall as the intensity of the freezing cold grew. The thing was inside me. I couldn't fight back, but it certainly wasn't for lack of trying. I slammed myself into the wall again and again, knocking over a small table with a vase on it in my attempts to purge the fog from me, but slowly my vision began to dim as my body temperature plummeted. I had no way of knowing how to get this thing out of my system, but I knew I had to try. An idea forming in my head, I ran haphazardly through the house, searching for my target, and I found it, a light bulb. It was getting hard to move by this point. The cold seemed to be taking over my body, locking up my systems. But with the last reserves of my strength, I smashed the light bulb, grabbed the metal prongs, and flipped on the switch. I awoke with a start minutes later to the sound of gunshots coming from deep in the forest. It took me a while to get my bearings, but slowly it all came back to me. The blue mist, the chilling cold, the light bulb, the others. "The others!" I exclaimed into the empty and now dark house. The shock must have shorted a fuse, as now every light in the house was out. That didn't matter, though, as the rest of the group was certainly in mortal peril now. I leapt to my feet and sprinted to the door. Before I left, I carefully checked for any sign of a glowing blue cloud, but it seemed as if the shock had either killed it or at least given it enough of a fright to send it off for some time. I checked the pistol one last time, took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping out into the pitch black night. The forest was still, but it certainly wasn't calm. Other than the occasional pops of gunfire, it was deathly silent, on edge even. I didn't want to run, justifying it with the fact that if I were to trip over an unseen branch, that would prevent anybody from getting help. But it was more to allow me to make less noise, in theory attracting less attention. But all it did was delay the inevitable, for before long the sounds of gunshots grew louder, and I was there. It was the most chaotic scene I'd observed to that point. From where I crouched in the bushes, I could see Frida sprinting from my left to right, glancing frantically over her shoulder. Edward, facing opposite me, operating some gadget I didn't recognize. Lawrence, hanging out of a tree with one hand, his sniper on the ground, a slim crack running down the barrel. Tiva taking cover behind a tree, shouting into a walkie-talkie, and Zephon was nowhere to be found. However, one thing I couldn't see was whatever they were fighting. I hadn't bothered to check the sensors before I left, due to both my hurriedness and an assumption that my shock had knocked out the power, so I hadn't a clue where any of them could be, the fog or the Wendigos. So I stepped out from the bushes, waving my arms. Guys, there's a problem," I shouted over the gunfire. "Something else is out here. It's not just Wendigos." "What are you talking about?" Edward asked, sprinting over to me when he found me in the darkness. "What were you thinking leaving the cabin? It's incredibly dangerous out here." "Listen, it's not just Wendigos out here. There's something else," I told him frantically. There was this glowing blue fog outside the cabin, and I'd seen an extra entity on the radar, so when I ran out of the house to try and warn you, "Oh, glowing blue fog. No, that's not good at all," he interrupted, running a hand through his hair. Then he took out his radio and spoke into it. "Zephon, get back here now." There was no response. "Zephon, get back to Area 3, he repeated. But again, there was nothing. "Where is he?" I asked. "We sent him to the den. The 2 adults are here with us. He would have been able to take one child alone," he replied. "You were going to kill a child?" I asked. "Doesn't that seem a little immoral to you?" "We don't get paid to be moral," Edward told me. "Now, if there are Venenook here, I'm going to need some equipment from the cabin. Find Zephon, give him any aid he requires, and survive until I get back." I nodded, and he sprinted off towards the cabin. I turned back to the fray, and as soon as I did so, a hulking figure emerged from the forest. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, The Wendigo completely blew away my expectations. It added about a foot to that total with its jagged antlers that protruded from the skull of what looked to be a buck. Its chest and back were covered in fur, and its legs stretched down into hooves. Sharp claws gleamed in the moonlight at the end of its long arms, and it paused for a moment before leaping into the air, slicing Lauren's rifle in two like a hot knife through butter. As it looked up at the man who was still struggling to regain his footing on the branch, it let out an unearthly howl, different still from the other two I'd heard. It was about to pounce when suddenly a flash of movement caught its eye. Frida's gun had jammed, so she tossed it aside and pulled out her sidearm, preparing to fire on it. However, before she could, it leapt with astounding speed towards her, halving the distance between them in a single jump. I fumbled with my hip holster, drawing my gun with shaking hands as she tried in vain to shoot the quick-footed creature. I lined up the sights, but there was no time to hone it in for sure, so I had to pull the trigger. Well, it was much louder in my hands than it had been listening from the cabin. It startled me so much that I reflexively dropped the pistol, but when I recovered my bearings, it seems like I had hit my target. The Wendigo lay on its side on the ground, mere feet away from Frida, who was now waving at me. As my hearing returned and the ringing in my ears died down, I began to hear her say, Go, find Zephan. We'll hold them off." I nodded, gingerly picking up the pistol, and ran off into the woods. I was making my way towards the path Tiva and I had found earlier that day, knowing that it had to lead to the den, where Zephan was most likely going through what I'd been through when the fog had entered my body. Running on pure adrenaline, I covered the ground in record time, arriving at the mouth of a cave jutting out to the grassy ground. I couldn't see more than a foot into it, and before I went in, I ran over to where we'd placed a sensor earlier that day and tore it out of the ground. As I made my way back to the cave, I stripped it apart until I found the small batteries, then ripped them out of their compartment. They were smaller than I'd expected, but they might just do the trick. Once inside the cave, I slowed my pace, fearing a rock outcropping or a sudden drop in the ceiling. But luckily, moments after entering, I heard a weak cough. "Zephan," I exclaimed, searching for the source of the noise. "Where are you?" Another cough was my only response, but it was closer, and I was able to locate him. I knelt down by the side of the dark figure and felt his arm. It was ice cold. Fearing that I might already be too late, I pried open his mouth and touched the batteries to his tongue. Instantly his body began to convulse, and I nearly lost all control of one of the circular batteries, but I managed to grab a hold of it and pull it out of his mouth. And then, two things happened simultaneously. Zephan sat bolt upright with a shout, sending me scrambling backwards. I'm lucky I had that reaction, because the second thing was a cloud of blue fog rushing out of his chest like a gust of wind, zipping past where I'd been moments ago and hitting the wall, causing it to spread out like a puff of smoke. Zephan, conscious once more, was incredibly confused. He glanced quickly around the cave, saying, What's going on? Where am I? God, it's cold in here." "Zephan, it's me," I panted, climbing to my feet, my energy all but depleted. "Come on, it's not safe here." "I don't know. I rather like the interior design. I think we should stay," he replied sarcastically. "Give me a hand, Sherlock. I can't feel my legs. What did you do to me? I haven't been this sore since the sexy bumblebee at the '92 San Diego State Halloween party turned out to be dating Marshall Falk." I paused for a moment in utter confusion, then decided it was better for the both of us to let the details of that story remain in the past. "I'm glad to see the shock didn't diminish your bright and cheery personality. You were being killed by, that." I gestured to the glowing blue cloud as I knelt down to help him up. "So I zapped you back to reality with a few batteries." "Batteries?" he exclaimed. "Oh, you didn't take them out of the sensor, did you?" "Yeah. Why?" I asked. "Oh, those aren't normal batteries. Christ, they're made specially to power the sensors," he said, smacking his forehead with his free hand. Oh, you could have killed me were I not so naturally resistant to electric shocks. Look, you're not naturally resistant to electric shocks, I said, rolling my eyes. Come on, let's... I cut off the sentence as a shadow crossed in front of the moonlight at the cave's entrance. We stopped walking and stood silently. I held my breath as my blood suddenly ran colder than Zephan's had been 5 minutes ago. We were about 15 feet back from the entrance, but we could clearly make out the figure of a Wendigo creeping closer towards us, distinctly outlined by the light of the moon. Saliva glistened on its teeth as it paused for a moment at the mouth of the cave, and for that moment it was silent. Then it let out a terrifyingly loud shriek, rearing its head back to look at the moon, and charged forward at us. "Oh, I thought you killed this thing," I shouted, scooping Zephan into my arms and running back into the cave. "I was sort of busy, dying," he reminded me. I rolled my eyes, sprinting as fast as I could. The creature seemed to have stopped its pursuit, but I didn't want to give it a chance to catch back up. However, I couldn't keep that pace up for long. I was already exhausted, and the short burst of energy from the pure terror of seeing the creature quickly wore off. I was now losing focus, getting sloppy, and it wasn't long before my ankle slammed into an unseen rock, and I was sent sprawling to the ground, Zephan smacking into the wall just in front of me, groaning. I quickly flipped over to my back to see if the Wendigo had caught up. Well, it had, but it hadn't been chasing me. It emerged from a side passageway, and behind it, the mist I'd stunned with the batteries followed, producing its unearthly glow with what I took as an aura of mockery. "Oh, son of a..." I muttered, but I was too tired to offer any resistance other than feebly crawling back on my elbows. It did nothing to slow the approach of the hideous Wendigo. Maybe it was the dim light cast by the mist, maybe it was my level of exhaustion, but I could have sworn I saw the corners of the Wendigo's jagged mouth turn up as he reared back to slice my body apart, ending me just like it had so many others. I closed my eyes, preparing for the blow, and then it came. It was strange. I didn't feel any pain as the claws tore through me. I felt them hit me. I heard a ringing in my ears, and I saw the famed light at the end of the tunnel, but the pain never... "You idiot. That makes twice tonight you've almost got me killed," Zephan shouted from the end of the cave. "You're buying next time we're at the tooth." "What?" I groaned, still staring into the light. "What happened?" Then the light drew nearer, and it spoke in a familiar British accent. "Blimey, you damn near got yourself and Zephan killed. You're lucky we got here in time, otherwise you'd be dinner." I saw then that it was Edward, carrying a flashlight and a gun. I sighed, closing my eyes, and rolled the dead Wendigo off of me. As I slowly regained my senses, I made out Tiva in the background. She was holding what looked like a vacuum cleaner, and she was switching it off. When she saw me looking at her, she rolled her eyes. "What did you do with the sensor? I put a lot of work into that." I explained, and she gasped. "What? You didn't kill him? How?" "I'm naturally shock resistant," Zephan butted in. "I don't want to get into that. Why are you holding a vacuum cleaner?" I said, hastily changing the subject before Zephan could... Well, I really don't know where that would lead, but probably not somewhere I want it to go. "Edward actually rigged this up," she said, gesturing to him. "We have equipment specifically for dealing with Venonok, but we didn't think we'd need them, as we had no reason to, so I had to improvise," he said. "Since the equipment's basically just a high-powered vacuum cleaner, that's what I made. Fiddled around with the wiring, just using some very technical electrical terms, but, to simplify, I hooked it up to a car battery and adjusted the current so that it would, as the Americans say, empty the tank." I was trying to focus on what he was saying. The last reserves of my energy finally gave out, and I laid my head down on the rock. "I don't suppose there's any chance anyone's going to carry me back." Edward nodded at Lawrence and said, "Lawrence will take you two back. Rest up, you've earned it. We'll take care of the rest of them." I finally let my fatigue take over, I was washed away into the tides of sleep. The next thing I remember, I was on the couch in the cabin. February 23rd. I didn't wake up until noon on Sunday, and when I did, Tiva was there to explain everything to me. She said that the job had been going fine until one of the Wendigos managed to sneak up on Lawrence. Lawrence reacted quickly enough to avoid a deadly blow, but it had knocked him off balance, and he'd nearly fallen out of the tree. Then, at the worst possible moment, the second adult had attacked. They believe now that the Venenook, the name for the blue mist, were responsible for the organization, and they were suspicious of their employer, as she'd mentioned that these were extenuating circumstances. Once Tiva had cleared everything up, the others came and told me that it was time to go. It had all happened in such a rush, the explanation, the car ride. Before I knew it, the most wild 24 hours of my life were over. The plane ride back, like the first, was mostly silent until the end, when Edward came over to sit next to me. I'd just woken up, as I was still incredibly emotionally taxed, and he sat in silence for a few seconds before beginning. You surprised us all. Now, all jokes aside, this was an extremely dangerous mission. Not only did you survive, but your participation was integral to our success, he said. Zephyr, though he might not show it, is grateful to you. He tells me you saved his life, directly, twice, though you may or may not have put it in danger twice as well. But without your bravery, your quick-wittedness, your intuition, we may have died. For that, we're all thankful. I was caught off guard by the in-depth compliment. Thank you, I guess. I was also expecting to die. I didn't think it was going to end up like that, though. He nodded. Well, I suppose you've earned a ticket into this strange, strange world. Oh, you're free to do what you want, except, of course, reveal any of this outside of the gold tooth. But now you can walk away a free man. You've gone toe-to-toe with unholy forces, and you came out of the other side in one piece. You can walk away right now, forget all about this, and live your life. But I have a feeling you won't. You've tasted this side of the world. You're ready to ride it to the end of the rabbit hole, aren't you? I didn't respond for a moment. Then I said, I need some time to think about it. He nodded. He knew as well as I did that he was right, so he didn't push the matter. I once again reiterate our gratefulness, he said, standing up. There'll be a cab waiting at the airport to bring you home. I'll see you again soon, my friend. Those were the last words any of them spoke to me, and they're bouncing around my head as I sit in the cab, watching the flashing lights of the city pass my window. The city that once felt vibrant and full of life now seemed dull, lifeless, and pointless. I thought back to the thrill I'd felt, that sense of invincibility, even the moment I thought I'd died. It was unlike anything I'd ever felt, and, well, I wanted more. They Are Not Wendigos by 02321. Part 1. Roughly a year ago, I found myself finishing a job sooner than I had expected. Due to that, I was stranded in an unfamiliar city without any place to rest in the middle of the night. Thankfully, I was able to find a motel that was open 24 hours. I was a bit run down, and I feared how clean the rooms were, but it was better than being on the street for the night. I walked into the small empty office to check in. I imagined the clerk was taking a nap, not expecting anyone to show up in the middle of the night. It took him a few minutes to arrive, and in those few minutes I started to snoop through the magazines on the counter. Old things about to be thrown away. I wasn't tired yet, and disliked most TV shows, so I often read in my spare time. I'd finished my small stash of paperback books, so I was in need of some reading material that night. In that pile of faded magazines was a notebook, a thin one meant for schoolwork. Interested, I started to flip through it, just as the clerk came by to greet me. After getting my room arranged, I asked about the journal. My guest had left it behind a few days before my arrival. The clerk didn't know who was in the room, only that they'd left the journal behind, room door wide open, and the bed pushed against the far wall. They'd kept the journal, thinking maybe the person was just going out and was coming back for it. Well, no one showed up, so the clerk was going to have it tossed out. I saved him a trip to the recycling bin out back and took the pile of magazines with the journal on top. After I was settled in my room, I started to look through the small journal again. It was a plain one you could purchase anywhere for $1 or less. The front few pages had been torn out. The rest of the pages were filled with neat handwriting detailing a story that most would find to be fiction. But I'd seen stranger things in this world and was not as fast to dismiss such stories. I've since given the journal to an acquaintance of mine that collects such things. I only remember the journal now because I'd heard about a person that appeared in the journal. Well, since I have the time, it's best I write down this first. Mind you, it has been a full year since reading this tale, so I may not get all the wording the way it had been written, but the events are all the same. This happened when I was still in school. It's an event my town hasn't forgotten about. No one but myself knows the truth of what happened. Well, I'm the only human who knows the truth. I was in my last year of school, ready to be free and enter adulthood. I counted down the days I could escape this town and go off to college, and what I thought at the time would be my real life to start. And I wasn't the only one. My two friends also wanted to get out of the slow and boring town. We all had different plans, but swore we'd keep in touch after grad. To celebrate, we planned to go camping over one of the last long weekends of our teenhood. Everything had been planned out months in advance. Funds put aside and booze hidden away for when the time came. The first bump in the road was when Josh started to date Rebecca. She was loud and the type that could not let any conversation die down or have any pauses. I found her annoying, but I liked how Josh was happy with her. I didn't think she was really a bad person or hate her. I could only just spend so much time around her, though. I never told him, but I think Josh knew. Somehow she found out about our trip and invited herself along. It was a setback, but I wasn't going to let her ruin our plans. I just have to find a way to like her. And then our lovable Tristan sprained his arm. He was a big goofball and must have had bones of steel for never breaking one before. His mother was the overprotective sort, and nearly didn't let him go into the woods with a sprained arm. I really wish he'd listened to her. We were young, and we thought we were immortal. Finally, the day arrived, and I was going over my bags, ready to get going, when the phone rang. My parents answered it, and in the next few minutes, they were in a frenzy. I had a sick aunt that lived out of state. She'd been in for treatments, and I guess wasn't doing well. My father and mother needed to go and see her, and I'd offered to come with. They told me my aunt would want me to go on my trip after looking forward to it so badly. I didn't think I needed to go with them, but the problem was what to do with my younger brother. He was 13 and, unlike Tristan, did not have bones of steel. He was accident-prone, combined with having the worst luck of any person on the planet. Even though he could have been on his own for a night or two, it wasn't worth the risk. If he did hurt himself, someone needed to be there to get him to the hospital. It was such short notice that none of the people who normally could watch him were available. So, the only thing to do was bring him with me. Bringing your little brother really was lame, but there was nothing I could do about it. It just meant I couldn't get wasted as planned. This was back in the days of those clunky flip phones. My dad gave me his, so in case my brother broke an ankle or got mauled by a bear, I could try and call for help. I shoved it into my jacket pocket. Because my parents took the car, we had to walk. Well, it wasn't that far, an hour at most. But, well, it was an hour if you were in high school. So my brother slowed us down, and we only arrived at the meeting spot when the sun had started to set. Tristan met me outside the woods and at the start of the trail. He gave me grief for bringing Jessie along, when I think he preferred my brother over Rebecca. Well, because I was late, they'd already set up their tents. He and Jessie scrambled in the dim light to set ours up. When I arrived, I found it pretty peaceful. Rebecca was sat on a log by a fire that Josh had started. She looked a bit pale, and I never knew her to stop talking, so, well, I was worried. "Hey, look at these weird flyers we found," Josh said before I could ask about Rebecca. He handed me a few sheets of paper. Well, I had noticed a piece of paper or two stuck to the trees while me and Tristan had walked through the woods, but I hadn't stopped to read them. Apparently they'd found a bunch, but used them all to start a fire. Well, almost all. Lost in the woods. Call this number. Need help? Call it. Seeing strange things. You guessed it, call this number. Each paper had the same phone number written at the bottom. Josh took the flyers back and tossed them in the fire before I'd memorized the number. Well, back then, not everyone had cell phones. I'd already forgotten I had my dad's phone in my pocket. Well, if I did, I think we would have messed around trying to call it, but all of us were unaware of the phone, and we just burned the papers. Hey, Jesse, why don't you go find some more wood for us? Josh suggested when he saw my brother already getting bored. Oh, that child took off holding a flashlight, glad to be trusted by an older person to do an important job. I got stressed over not being able to see Jesse or him going off into the woods, but he was smart enough to stay inside of us. Hey, you feeling all right, Rebecca? I finally asked. As Jesse was going back and forth between the edge of the woods and dumping twigs, the three of us talked about school, but Rebecca stayed staring at the fire. She nodded at times, but didn't contribute to the conversation. It was just so out of character for her. All right, she said, not looking at me. Well, she doesn't have a fever. Just tired, I guess, Josh told us, and wrapped an arm around her. Just tired, she said with a nod, but still looked out of it. Hey, maybe we should take her back, I suggested, and started to stand up. It was already dark, but I could find my way out of the woods if I followed the path with the flashlight. I didn't want them to think I'd want her gone, but, well, I was worried for her. No! Her head shot up and she gave me such a dark glare that it made me freeze. Something was not right with her. She must have realized how odd she was acting, so she forced her face into a strained smile. Just tired, she said again, sounding a bit more natural and like herself. Well, Tristan didn't like the tension, and to break the mood, he brought out the marshmallows. Jesse then magically appeared when the treats came out, and soon Rebecca's odd mood was forgotten. Well, the next few hours were a good time. We made s'mores, roasted marshmallows, and dared each other to eat them while they were still on fire. Our plan was to drink, but we only had one beer each. Jesse tried a sip and gagged on the taste. I hope that experience turned him off drinking until he was old enough. Even with the slight hiccups in our plan, we had a good time. Hours of chatting and sharing dumb stories, talking about future plans. When Rebecca decided to turn in, I thought it would be best if we all had an early night. I put Jesse into our tent and stayed outside to help Josh chop some firewood. Tristan still had a sore arm, so he went to his small single tent next to mine, leaving us the work. We knew if we didn't do it that night, we'd be too tired and lazy in the morning. Josh brought a small hand axe to make it easier. It didn't take very long to make a decent-sized pile. Jesse did a good job of finding small branches, but we needed some bigger pieces to keep the fire going. I don't remember what my last word had been to Josh. Most nights I sit awake now, trying to think what I said to him when he went into his tent, or if I said anything to him at all. So as last hours with your friends go, I had a good few. Inside the tent was a little bit crammed with me and Jesse. Somehow I was able to sleep for an hour, but because of the small space, Jesse woke me up when he sat up. He crawled on me to try and find the flashlight, and I was a bit annoyed being woken up. What are you doing? I whispered in case everyone else was sleeping. I need to pee, Jesse whispered back. Oh, I groaned. I didn't need to go, but I couldn't let Jesse go out on his own and get eaten by some wild animal. For some reason, a mental image of a monster-sized owl swooping down and just taking my brother away made me snort or laugh. Knowing his luck, that would happen to Jesse. I'll come with you. I got up and grabbed my jacket. Getting out and stretching, I waited for Jesse to start walking. Our fire was still going, but weakly. Jesse turned on the flashlight and swept the beam of light into the woods, testing it out. saw a flicker of white in the light. I thought it was another one of those weird flyers stuck to a tree. I stared at the white shape, trying to make it out, but was distracted when I heard Josh's tent open. Staring at the white shape in the darkness, I saw it move. I was so sure it was just a paper fluttering in the wind, but then another white shape came from behind a different tree, and then another. And next to me, Jesse screamed. On reflex, I wrapped an arm around him and shot my head over towards Josh's tent to see what had scared my brother so much. Rebecca stood, barefoot, looking at us. Just tired, she said in a strained voice that did not belong to Rebecca. Her front was covered in so much blood it dripped into the dirt below her. She still had her face, but her body looked too skinny and too pale. Long, twisted fingers reached out towards us as she took a stumbling step closer. No, just tired. Then everything happened at once. Tristan came shooting out of his tent to see what the scream was about. He stared in shock at Rebecca and couldn't do anything when a blur of white came shooting out of the dark woods and on top of him. I darted forward to grab the axe beside the fire pit, but let go of Jesse when I did. My dumb little brother ran. He ran screaming into the woods, still holding the flashlight. Now I had an awful decision to make. One that I still regret to this day. A creature was on top of Tristan, my dear friend, screaming and struggling to get it off of him. It was deathly thin and pale, its mouth filled with countless teeth snapping, trying to get a bite out of his face. Rebecca still hadn't moved. I saw more faces of these pale creatures slowly coming out from behind the trees. Axe in hand, I grabbed the thing off Tristan and pulled it off of him. I swung the axe into its neck, causing it to squeal horribly. Tristan looked up at me with a shocked, thankful look, but well, then I left him. I don't think I killed the thing that had attacked him, but I just turned and ran after one swing. I could still hear and see Jesse, so I couldn't stay and help Tristan. Well, I don't know what happened to him after I left him behind. I wasn't even aware enough to realize I was still holding the axe, leaving him defenseless. Well, I could only hope that he got up and ran. Part 2. Caught up to my screaming and crying brother. I grabbed his hand and we ran together, flying past more and more papers stuck to trees, not stopping to read them. Each paper a pale white, making us think those creatures were still coming after us. We saw some figures, but they were moving towards our camp at the moment. So we ran in a panic. When I finally made us slow down, I realized in horror we didn't know where we were. We had gotten lost in such a short amount of time. Well, Jessie was sobbing, but had run so much she couldn't get enough air in to cry out loud. My head darted around, looking for more of those creatures. Keeping a grip on Jessie's hand, I made us walk, trying to find the trail. By sheer luck, we didn't come across any more of those creatures, but rather found ourselves in a clearing, the full moon giving us enough light to see by, so I made Jessie turn the flashlight off to save batteries and to not let the creatures see us. I let him cry as quietly as he could. I didn't blame him. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw white and I raised the axe. On a tree beside us was a piece of paper that hadn't been there before. Paper I'd mistaken for a monster. As I stared at it, writing appeared. Lost in the woods, being chased by monsters, little brother with you. Your name is Cal. If that's you, call Jake. No, really, call me. Under the words was the same phone number as before. It was just too weird. Being chased by monsters was scary, but this was just weird. I was wearing my jacket and had the phone in the pocket. I didn't think we had anything to lose by calling the number. I mean, our situation couldn't get much worse, right? Well, of course, I first tried to dial 911, but only static came through. So with shaking fingers, I dialed the number. A single ring right next to me made us both jump. "You kiddos need some help." I pulled Jessie into protective grip when I heard the voice. Beside us was a person that had not been there before, flip phone to their ear. Even in the situation we were in, I didn't trust this stranger. They were wearing a black coat so large it wasn't practical. The sleeves hung close to the ground and the collar covered half of their face. Well, by their voice and what was visible of their face, I couldn't tell what gender they were. But if this was Jake, as mentioned on the paper, then I guess they were a guy. Well, Jake was tall and only took 2 steps to get in front of us, staring down over the collar of the coat. Red hair covered half of Jake's face and their right eye. The left eye was a deep, glowing red that made me realize I was not dealing with someone human. "Can you help us?" Jessie whimpered, and I held on to him tighter. "Well, sure I can," Jake purred, looking pleased by our fearful state. I saw more creatures off in the distance through the trees. They looked wary of the newcomer, but I knew they'd come towards us soon. My distrust was forgotten when I saw the faces of the pale creatures start to surround us. "Please, save us from those Wendigos," I begged. I didn't actually know what those creatures were, so the first monster name that came to mind spilled out. "They're not Wendigos," Jake stated, point blank. "What does it matter?" I spat out, anxiety spiking when a pale face came even closer through the trees. "It does. If you say, please, Jake, save us from some Wendigos." "Well, I'm bound to only save you from Wendigos. These things could eat you and I could do nothing. Wording is important, you know." Well, I was half listening to Jake, but I still got the point. Jessie was clinging on to me as he started to freak out over just how close these creatures had gotten. A brave one had gotten only a tree away. It stared at us with dead eyes, mouth wide and drool dripping to the forest floor. "Please, save us from these things trying to eat us," I said quickly, my voice pitching in panic. What would you two give me in exchange for saving you?" Jake asked, a red eye gleefully looking down at us. "Anything," I shrieked as a creature finally jumped towards us, its twisted long fingers reaching out ready to tear us apart. I was desperate and so overcome with fear I didn't think of what I promised to give. I only wanted to get us out of these woods. I was convinced the pale creature was going to reach us. It was so close to my face I could feel its rancid breath. But then, suddenly, it was gone. Jake had moved so fast I didn't even see what had happened. One moment I was a second away from having my face bitten off, and the next the creature had its head crushed into a tree, and the pale body was limp on the ground. "Hold my coat." The coat was tossed at us, but I let it drop, being in shock at what had just happened. I stared at the dead creature, then looked around to see the rest retreating further back after one of their members had been killed. They still stared at us through the darkness, but almost looked scared, jittering through the trees. "You're a girl?" I asked Jake, letting the first question that came to my mind slip out. Well, there was a much more pressing matter at hand, but for some reason that was what my brain wanted to say right then. Jake had a scar over the right side of her mouth that exposed teeth and twisted her top lip, making her forever smirk. She was only wearing black shorts and a sports bra, and she was skinny enough for me to see all of her ribs, but oddly enough her arms looked muscled. "Wrap the coat around yourself. It'll cover up your smell and protect you from those things trying to bite you. I need to attract them to me and put them into a frenzy to take them all out at once. Jake reached out and took my jacket sleeve and pulled so quickly it easily tore off. I was a bit annoyed, but let her. She then roughly took my hand and I cursed when she cut a deep gash into the palm. Letting the jacket sleeve soak up the blood, she offered no apology. Oh, Jessie looked worried but was also too traumatized to react. When the sleeve was wet enough, Jake tied it around her forearm and walked away from us into the middle of the clearing that we'd stumbled into. I quickly wrapped myself and Jessie under the large coat. I poked my head out of the top so I could still see what was going on though. The creatures had started to make hissing noises when my hand was cut. They could smell the fresh blood and they no longer were scared of Jake. They only wanted to find the source of the smell so they could finally eat. With Jessie safely under the coat, my arms wrapped around him, holding as tight and as close as possible. I watched, wondering what on earth Jake was going to do. Standing in the middle of the clearing, she waited for the creatures to come closer. The moon was full, so I could see what was happening perfectly. And a blur of white darted out towards her, only to be slammed down into the ground. Without giving it time to recover, Jake twisted its head clean off. That gave me some hope of living through the night. She was strong enough to swat away the monsters that had killed my friends. Motivated by the smell of blood, 2 more creatures came at her. They screamed a horrible sound that made my stomach turn to ice. One managed to cut Jake's shoulder before it went down. She didn't seem to notice in the slightest. In fact, she was smiling. In a short time I could no longer count the number of pale forms in the woods around the clearing, and I soon realized what our downfall could be. Jake was strong, but could not deal with the sheer number of monsters coming for her. If more than 3 came at her at once, she'd get cut or harmed before she could kill her attackers. I watched my fear returning as 2 more took a fall in one's place. Jake took a brutal cut across her stomach from the creature's claws, but for some reason, she just started to laugh. Every cut she received, she started to laugh harder. Tossing aside dead and torn-apart creatures, her laughter grew to a crazed shriek. Jessie started to shake under the coat, not seeing what I was, but the laughter was scaring him. He had no idea what was going on, or that a new monster had now appeared. I held him, forcing him not to worry. Jake was on our side, and we'd live through the night. That was all that mattered. But what I saw next made me completely doubt that fact. Something else had come from the forest. It made the remaining creatures scatter and try to get away, only to be caught and scooped up by this new monster's many arms. It had somewhat of a human shape. Countless human arms lined each side of its body, human legs twisting together to make a pair supporting its massive weight. Its head was made up of skulls and half-decayed faces. When it snatched up a creature, alive or dead, a bundle of heads parted to show a ring of sharp teeth. It tossed whole bodies down into the deep, endless-looking mouth. I had no idea how Jake was going to fight this thing, as injured as she was. A flicker of doubt on her face, seeing the new monster, made my stomach drop. I considered turning to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My body was shutting down, unable to do anything now but watch as the monstrous thing launched itself across the clearing straight at Jake. I couldn't do anything as it bore its weight down on her, forcing her to the ground. With great strain she kept it above her, her small arms looking like they were at their breaking point, lifting up such a great mass. The arms of the monster grabbed at her, pinning her flailing legs down, trying to pull at her arms. Clawed hands started to dig into her stomach, tearing apart skin easily as she screamed. I felt bile rise to my throat as I stared on in utter horror. Jake's organs were being torn from her while she was unable to do anything but scream. Well, I thought we'd lost, that was the end. The monster parted his head to drop one of Jake's legs that it had ripped from her into its horrible mouth, when her screaming stopped. In my utter confusion, I saw she was smiling again. The smirk that made it seem like everything was going according to her plan. "Gotcha," I heard faintly, before her hair started to glow like embers. And then a blast of flame shot out from her directly into the amalgamation's open mouth. And I mean a blast, a tunnel of flame shooting upwards to the monster's head, burning it to nothing within seconds. The light was so bright I could barely see, and the flames burned away leaves on the trees at the start of the clearing. I had to duck back under the coat to protect my face and eyes from the heat. Well, I don't know how long I stayed under the coat, holding my little brother, saying to him everything was going to be all right. Well, I really just wanted it to stop right then. The monsters were gone. We could rest. But I couldn't. I had to see what had happened to Jake and if there was anything left of her. She was owed that much. Reassuring Jesse some more, I got out from under the coat, leaving him hidden. The air smelled awful, a mixture of burnt flesh and decaying meat that made me gag. I composed myself to look around. Some small spots were still flickering with flame. Bushes and leaves I hoped would go out before they turned into a real fire. I could still feel the heat in the air. The body of the monster was still, tossed aside and head melted off. Jake was next to it, half her body missing, but strangely one eye looking at me as if waiting for me to come closer. But she couldn't still be alive, could she? "Hey, a little help here, Scout." Her hoarse voice made me jump and run over to her. I was going to lose my dinner if I looked at the gore her stomach had turned into, and so I focused on her face. "Need you to do something for me." "How are you?" I started to ask, but she cut me off. "You need to cut off my head. Attach it to one of those creatures' bodies. One without broken arms, or one you think looks the most attractive." She then let out a laugh, but it was so hoarse it sounded like a cough. I don't think I can," I stuttered, still feeling on the verge of being sick. "You said you'd do anything if I saved you, right?" And with a final laugh and a smile still on her face, Jake stopped breathing. The remaining heat and the small fires flickered out at the same time as her. Well, she was right. I had agreed to do anything for her. Wording was important, as she'd said. I had to do this. Part 3. I left the axe with Jesse. When I went to grab it, I checked on him, making sure he didn't see any of the dead around us. The first one that Jake had killed was so close, so I picked it up under its arms and dragged it into the clearing. She'd smashed its head, so I didn't need to cut it off. But cutting hers off proved to be an ordeal. I had to stop fairly often to try heave and shake. I will never forget the feeling in my hands of the axe cutting into bone. When she died, her smile was still on her face. I didn't know if it was because of her scar or because her muscles hadn't loosened yet, but she was still smiling. It was a very surreal experience holding a smiling head in my hands. I put it on the creature's neck as fast as I could while rubbing my palms on my jeans trying to remove the feeling. I wondered if I had to attach the head somehow, with thread or tape. But that question was answered seconds after Jake's head was connected to the dead body. Parts of her old body fell into piles of ash. The body her head was loosely attached to burst into flames and blackened. The creature's body peeled away, and Jake's appeared underneath. Her wounds were healed, and she was very much alive as she sat up, rubbing her neck. To my horror, she sat without anything covering her. Even the clothing she'd been wearing had faded when her old body had. Even after I saw what Jake looked like under her coat, I doubted her gender. She was built like a male, meaning she had a completely flat chest, but seeing her exposed made me fully realize she was in fact a girl. I bolted, grabbing her coat and tossing it on top of her in record speed. I didn't want my brother to see a weird naked woman on top of everything else he'd seen that night. She didn't look embarrassed. Instead, she cackled at my flushed face. Can we leave now, please? I asked, trying to cut through her laughter. All right, fine. Don't be grumpy. I doubt anything is going to attack you two after all of this, but I'll still walk you two out of the woods. If you're still frightened, you can hold my hand, little ones. No, thanks. We both shot at the same time. Oddly, Jake's smile fell a little, and she looked a little offended by our rejection. His legs are too short. Carry him, Jake ordered me, talking about my brother. Jesse had been so shaken up I doubted he could walk, and it would take us forever to get out of the woods. I helped Jesse on my back, my cut hand still stinging. I kept the axe in my other hand for the walk back, just in case. Reaching out, Jake placed a hand on Jesse's head. He slumped forward, becoming dead weight on my back. I was about to lay into her when she waved me off. I just put the little one to sleep. He's seen enough this night. I can carry him if you wish. In fact, if you're not so attached, I can take him off your hands entirely. I'm aware of how bratty little brothers can be. I was exhausted from everything that had happened. Even so, I refused to be teased by this woman. At least I hoped at the time that she was just teasing me. Don't touch him, I snapped, and nearly took a step back when her smile fell. Jake was by far more terrifying than anything in the forest at that moment. Oh, how are you going to stop me? You both promised me anything if I saved you. I can collect on that at any time. I could take him right now, or parts of him. He has such lovely blue eyes, and I'm looking for a new one to replace my own. Reaching out while she spoke, I was sure she would do something horrible if I didn't stop her. I couldn't think, so I acted on instinct. When her hand came closer, I turned my head and bit down on it as hard as I could. I felt hot blood come into my mouth. So hot I thought my tongue would burn off, but I didn't let go. It tasted awful and it hurt, but I held fast. Another laugh from her, and she easily pulled her hand away, the bite mark healing before my eyes. We don't owe you anything, I spat, trying to get the taste from my mouth. I saved you. You were dead. You already got something from us. That horrible sneer came back, an expression that made my heart nearly stop. You think I could die from something like that? I'd be just fine. I switched bodies for your sake. I would have healed, but a new body got you out of these woods faster. Besides, do you think I could just ask you for one thing? Well, you agree to anything. Wording is important. I can ask anything of you until you both die. Even if you do somehow save my life, that doesn't mean we're equal. That's the deal we made. Anything for your life. Oh, she looked so proud of herself, cackling away as I finally let my mistake fully sink in. That's not fair, I said, hating how my voice was trembling. Fair? Fair? Her voice had gotten louder and more excited. Fair is a human concept. What do you think you made a deal with? Not human, and fair is not what I do. I had to do something. I had to think my way out of this. I didn't let my friends die only to have Jesse's under Jake's thumb for the rest of his life. I at least needed to save him. Well, that's what older siblings are for. I'll take Jesse's debt from you. I'll do anything for you, anything. You just don't get him, I said, so suddenly that it shocked myself. Oh, how is that fair for me? You were just talking about that word. Why would I take an offer I lose on? Because fair is a human concept. You're not human. You shouldn't care about how fair the offer is. I could feel myself sweat as I waited for her reaction. She started to smile again, but this time it was a softer expression. She was laughing, but with a laugh that a proud parent would make. Fine, I'll take that unfair deal. You belong to me, but your little brother shall be spared. Let's get the hell out of these woods. Your human smell is making me hungry. I relaxed then, for the first time, and watched as Jake started to walk away, leaving me behind. Adjusting Jessie on my back, I followed after her, finally leaving everything that had happened behind. Well, the walk out of the woods was uneventful. Jake got us back to the trail and walked in front, but I knew no other monsters would come for us. I was tired from carrying my sleeping brother, but refused to stop or rest. When we got out, I stood in the parking lot staring at Josh's car, trying to think of what to do next. Jake didn't leave, just watched my silent breakdown. "Give me the axe," she said, holding her hand out for it. "What?" I didn't even know that I was still holding it. I gave it to her, glad to be free from it. "Now let me borrow your brother for a few seconds." Well, that made me back away from her defensively, and she let out a sigh. 3 people died. You humans are going to make a big deal of it. I have a human that's a loose end for myself. I can make him confess to chopping up your friends with this axe. The police are happy to have a closed case, and I get rid of that human. I don't do things for free, and you cannot offer me anything more. This way I can do a cleanup and have it benefit myself," she explained. "Hey, those flyers, you knew we were in danger. Why didn't you save us sooner?" I asked, remembering the 4 of us at the camp looking at the odd papers. "You didn't call me. I cannot do things for free. I cannot come until asked. In fact, helping humans is not my job. I just do this for fun. God, it's my fault." Tears came to my eyes. I'd had a cell phone. If I'd just called Jake sooner, we may all still be here. "No, it's not anyone's fault. Like I said, creatures don't do fair. It's not fair one of your group was replaced and it killed your friends. You're not aware of the dark side of this world, so why would you bother calling for help if you didn't know of the danger?" Well, I didn't know if she meant to try and cheer me up. It wasn't in her character, but it did make me feel a small bit better. My friends were still gone, but at least I knew there wasn't much we could do about it. "I can alter your brother's memory. You and him left to piss in the woods. Got lost, and when you came back, a crazy man had killed your friends. That's going to be the truth of what happened. Not a good truth, but one he can handle. And I can find children are bad actors. I can't have him rambling about monsters now." Well, that made sense. I didn't want to trust her with my brother, but I did think in the long run it would be better for him to remember something a bit more down to earth. A therapist could deal with an axe murder trauma. He'd have more issues trying to get people to believe him about pale forest creatures. A few waves of Jake's hand over Jesse's forehead was all it took to alter his memory for when he woke up. "Why don't you change mine too? I don't think you want me to know about strange creatures of the night," I asked, but got a sharp kick to the shin. "I don't do things for free." Jesse was so traumatized by what happened, his memory changed on its own. Got it? Well, I got the hint. Apparently helping Jesse was a freebie. One we couldn't talk about, and had to pretend that Jake had done nothing. "And I can't change yours. You made a deal with me. Let's say I made a deal that I would save you for a nice dinner. Then you gave me that dinner, and I just changed your memory of either not giving me what I was owed, or to you saying you owe me something else. I hate the rules, but they keep some sort of order. If you make a deal with a creature, your memory cannot be altered. But some don't give a slightest care for the rules. Believe it or not, you got a good deal with me." I didn't want to consider the fact that Jake was really better than some monsters out there. She was a monster in her own right, but at least we made it out alive. "Why did you save us?" I asked. She mentioned that saving humans was not her job. She'd gotten hurt, and I doubted having her organs torn out was fun in the moment. She looked back and forth and huffed, as if she was debating if she was going to answer me or not. "I have a soft spot for kids," she admitted finally, looking almost embarrassed. Before departing, Jake told me to keep her number. She gave me a grim prediction that once a person encounters a supernatural creature, they're almost always killed by one, if they live through that first encounter. Everything played out the way she'd said. The man confessed to killing Josh, Rebecca, and Tristan. They found their blood, but no bodies. I fear my friends had been added to the amalgamation Jake had killed, or turned into pale creatures that may still hunt in the forest. I stayed in my small sleepy town. I think after what happened, I'd never go to the woods, but now I'm a volunteer ranger. I'm the one who goes trying to find lost people. Sometimes I find them. Sometimes I don't. Well, Jesse turned out as fine as he could. He's going to therapy still, but he's starting to date, which makes me happy. All I wanted was for him to live a normal life. I could have easily thought the whole thing was just a bad dream, something my mind made up. I wanted to force myself to believe that. I'd never seen anything strange since, even in the woods. Well, I've heard stories, but nothing like what I'd gone through. I was able to settle down into a normal day-to-day life. Well, until she showed up to collect my debts. She told me to meet her in a motel room at 8 p.m. Don't know what she wants with me. I didn't ask. But I don't think I'll be seen again. I don't know why I'm bothering to write any of this down. Anyone would think that this was fiction or I'd lost it. But I still arrived. I was early to write this story out in my old notebook. Even if one person finds it, I want to warn them about making deals. If it had been just me that night, I would have let myself get eaten. But Jesse made it out. I don't know what the cost is going to be for me, but it's almost too great. I now know there are things far worse than death. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you can make a deal with a monster, and if you can, take a second, please think. You do not want to be in debt to these things. And if you do become indebted, keep in mind they're not fair creatures, and wording is very important. Sadly, that was all that was written in the journal. I was to leave the next morning, so I couldn't research the story further. Even now I'm running out of time to write down what I read a year ago. My job does keep me busy. I heard another story about this Jake recently. She was with a different creature and didn't do much, but she was there. Maybe I can find more stories about her. I'll sit and listen to anything that comes my way. Oh, and I'll write down any more good tales that come along. And so once again, we reach the end of tonight's podcast. My thanks as always to the authors of those wonderful stories, and to you for taking the time to listen. Now, I'd ask one small favor of you. Wherever you get your podcast from, please write a few nice words and leave a 5-star review, as it really helps the podcast. That's it for this week, but I'll be back again same time, same place, and I do so hope you'll join me once more. Until next time, sweet dreams and bye-bye.